She called me pathetic and unambitious, then moved in with her successful new boyfriend. What she didn't know, I secretly owned his company. My name is Dorian Castellanos. I'm 38 years old, and I've spent the last decade building what most people would call a boring life. I run a small investment advisory firm in Austin, Texas, helping middle-class families plan for retirement. Nothing flashy, nothing glamorous, just steady, reliable work that pays the bills and keeps me under the radar. At least that's what everyone thought. The text message that changed everything came on a Tuesday afternoon while I was reviewing portfolio allocations for a client. It was from Lydia, my girlfriend of 3 years, and it included a photo that made my stomach drop. She was at some upscale restaurant downtown, her arms wrapped around a guy in an expensive suit I didn't recognize. Both of them were laughing, champagne glasses raised in what looked like a celebration. The message below the photo was even worse. Finally found someone who matches my energy. Kieran just got promoted to vice president at Meridian Digital. He's everything you're not, driven, successful, going places. I can't waste any more time with someone who's content being mediocre. I set my phone down and stared out the window at the Austin skyline. Lydia had been my anchor for 3 years, the person I thought understood that success didn't always have to be loud and public. We'd talked about marriage, about building something quiet and meaningful together. Apparently, I'd been wrong about what she wanted. The irony wasn't lost on me as I opened my laptop and pulled up a folder labeled Private Holdings. Lydia thought I lacked ambition because I drove a modest Honda and lived in a regular neighborhood. She had no idea that my boring investment firm was actually a front for something much larger. She definitely didn't know that I'd been quietly acquiring shares in Meridian Digital Solutions for the past 18 months. Or that as of last week, I owned 67% of the company where she and her new boyfriend worked. Let me explain how I ended up in this position. After graduating from UT with a finance degree, I spent 5 years at Goldman Sachs in New York, learning how the real money moved. Not the flashy IPOs you read about in the news, but the quiet acquisitions that reshape entire industries overnight. I came back to Austin in 2019 with $3.2 million in savings and a simple plan. Build a network of shell companies and investment vehicles that would let me acquire businesses without anyone knowing who was really behind the purchases. My public-facing firm, Castellanos Financial Advisory, was deliberately small and unremarkable. It gave me the perfect cover. While other guys my age were buying Ferraris and posting LinkedIn humble brags, I was systematically purchasing minority stakes in tech companies across Austin. Nothing dramatic, nothing that would trigger SEC reporting requirements. Just a patient, methodical approach to building real wealth. Lydia never understood this strategy. She worked in marketing at various startups and measured success by surface-level metrics, job titles, salary figures, the kind of car you drove. When I picked her up in my Honda Civic for our first date, she'd actually looked disappointed. "I thought finance guys drove BMWs," she'd said with a laugh that wasn't entirely joking. I should have paid more attention to that comment. Over 3 years together, Lydia grew increasingly frustrated with what she saw as my lack of ambition. She wanted me to apply for senior positions at larger firms, to network at industry events, to build the kind of visible career that would impress her friends. When I tried to explain that I was building something bigger behind the scenes, she'd roll her eyes. "Dorian, you're 38 years old and you have 6 employees. Some of my friends' boyfriends are already VPs at major companies." The comparison game became a constant theme. Lydia followed several Austin tech executives on Instagram, constantly showing me their vacation photos and company announcements. She particularly admired Meridian Digital Solutions, one of Austin's fastest-growing marketing agencies. "Now that's a company with real vision," she'd say, scrolling through their corporate posts. "Those guys know how to build something impressive." If only she knew I'd been quietly buying Meridian shares for over a year. The breakup text wasn't Lydia's only message that afternoon. 20 minutes later, she sent another photo, this time of her and Kieran at what looked like a company celebration. He was holding up a bottle of Dom Perignon, and she was wearing a cocktail dress I'd never seen before. Kieran's promotion party at Meridian. "Real success looks different than what I'm used to. We're making it official. I'm moving in with him next week. You can keep the apartment, obviously." Good luck with your little retirement planning business. That last line stung more than she probably intended. My little retirement planning business was generating over $200,000 annually in advisory fees, but that wasn't the real source of my wealth. The real money came from my private equity plays, and Meridian Digital was shaping up to be my biggest win yet. I'd first noticed Meridian 18 months ago during my routine screening of Austin tech companies. They were growing fast, but burning through cash even faster, typical for an agency trying to scale too quickly. The founders, two guys named Marcus Hoffman and Trevor Yu, were talented but financially naive. They'd taken on too much debt and were headed for a liquidity crisis. That's when I started buying. Not directly, of course. I used 3 different investment entities: Lone Star Holdings, Austin Growth Partners, and Pinnacle Investment Group, to gradually acquire shares from early employees and small investors who wanted to cash out. The founders had no idea that all 3 entities rolled up to companies I controlled. By the time Lydia was sending me those photos, I owned 67% of Meridian Digital Solutions. Marcus and Trevor still thought they were running their own company, but they were actually employees of mine. And Kieran, Lydia's new ambitious boyfriend, was about to learn what real ambition looked like. I opened my laptop and pulled up Meridian's organizational chart. Kieran Walsh, Vice President of Business Development, hired 6 months ago, $95,000 salary plus commission. His LinkedIn profile was exactly what I expected, all buzzwords and fake confidence. The same LinkedIn profile Lydia had probably been stalking before she met him. I picked up my phone and typed a response to Lydia's messages. Congratulations to both of you. I hope Kieran's promotion works out well. She had no idea what that actually meant. Looking back, the signs of Lydia's dissatisfaction had been building for months. It started subtly, comments about other couples we knew who were doing better, or suggestions that I should be more strategic about my career. She'd begun attending more networking events, always coming home with stories about successful entrepreneurs and executives she'd met. The shift became more obvious after her friend Miranda got engaged to a tech VP last spring. Suddenly, every conversation involved comparisons to Miranda's fiancé and his impressive trajectory. Lydia started pushing me to apply for positions at larger firms, to build a more visible presence in Austin's business community. You're smart enough to be running a major wealth management division, she'd say, but you're choosing to stay small. I don't understand why you're not more ambitious. What she didn't understand was that visibility was the enemy of the strategy I was executing. The moment I took a high-profile job at a major firm, my activities would become subject to compliance monitoring and conflict of interest restrictions. I'd lose the flexibility that made my acquisition strategy possible. I tried explaining this once about 6 months ago. We were at dinner, and Lydia was again comparing me to some Austin entrepreneur she'd read about in the business journal. Lydia, what if I told you I was already building something bigger than what you see? She'd looked skeptical. Like what? I can't give you all the details, but I've been making some strategic investments, positioning myself for opportunities that aren't public yet. She'd laughed, not meanly, but dismissively. Dorian, you manage retirement accounts for school teachers. What kind of opportunities are you talking about? That should have been my warning sign. Lydia saw my work as small and insignificant because she didn't understand how real wealth was built. She equated success with job titles and public recognition, missing the fact that the most successful investors operated quietly, below the radar. The final straw came 3 weeks ago at a party thrown by one of her coworkers. I'd met several people from various Austin companies, including 2 guys from Meridian Digital. They were friendly enough, talking about their agency's rapid growth and recent client wins. Later that night, Lydia had been unusually quiet on the drive home. Those Meridian guys seem really impressive, she'd finally said. Their company is going places. It made me think about trajectories. Trajectories? Where people are headed. Where we're headed. I should have told her then that I owned most of Meridian Digital, but part of me wanted to see how deep her dissatisfaction really went. Now I had my answer. The next morning I called my attorney, Patricia Chen, who'd been helping me structure my acquisitions for the past 3 years. Patricia was one of the few people who understood the full scope of my holdings, and she'd been anticipating this moment as much as I had. "Good morning, Dorian. I assume you're calling about Meridian. The time has come. I want to exercise full control." Patricia had been preparing the documentation for months. Under the terms of my various share purchases, I had the right to call a board meeting and restructure Meridian's leadership whenever I chose. The founders, Marcus and Trevor, had unknowingly signed away their control when they'd agreed to my investment terms 18 months ago. "I can have everything ready by Friday," Patricia said. "How public do you want this to be?" "Not public at all. I want a quiet transition. Marcus and Trevor can stay on as senior executives, but I'm taking operational control, and I want to review all personnel decisions going forward, including recent promotions. Especially recent promotions. The beauty of my position was that nobody at Meridian knew who was really pulling the strings. My 3 investment entities had different addresses, different contact points, and different legal representatives. From Meridian's perspective, they'd simply taken investments from multiple sources over time. The reality was that all roads led back to me. Thursday afternoon, I drove past Meridian's offices in downtown Austin. It was a sleek space in a converted warehouse. The kind of place that looked impressive in photos, but probably cost more than it should. Through the windows, I could see people working at standing desks. The usual startup aesthetic of exposed brick and industrial lighting. Somewhere in there, Kieran was probably celebrating his promotion, maybe planning his next date with Lydia. He had no idea that his new position existed entirely at my discretion. That evening, I received another text from Lydia, with a photo of her and Kieran at some trendy restaurant. They looked happy, successful, like they were building something important together. "This is what ambition looks like," she'd written. "Kieran's already talking about the changes he wants to make at Meridian. He's a real visionary." I almost laughed. Kieran's vision was about to meet reality. Friday morning, Patricia sent me a text. "Documentation complete. You're officially the controlling owner of Meridian Digital Solutions. Board meeting scheduled for Monday at 9 a.m. Lydia thought she'd traded up from someone without ambition to someone with real drive and vision. She was about to learn the difference between ambition and actual power. Monday morning arrived with the kind of crisp October weather that made Austin beautiful. I dressed carefully, not too formal, not too casual. Today wasn't about making a statement with my appearance. It was about making a statement with actions. The Meridian Digital offices were buzzing with typical Monday energy when I arrived at 8:45 a.m. I checked in with the receptionist, a young woman named Claire who looked confused when I mentioned I was there for a board meeting. "I'm sorry, I don't have anything on the calendar about a board meeting," she said, scrolling through her computer. "It's a special session. Marcus and Trevor should be expecting me." 5 minutes later, Marcus Hoffman emerged from the back offices looking bewildered. He was exactly what I'd expected from his LinkedIn profile. Mid-30s, startup casual dress, the kind of nervous energy that came from being permanently overstretched. "I'm sorry, Mr. Castellanos. Dorian Castellanos. We need to talk." Marcus led me to a conference room where Trevor Yu was already waiting, looking equally confused. Both men had the slightly panicked expression of founders who'd received an unexpected visit from someone claiming to represent their investors. "Gentlemen," I said, taking a seat at the head of their conference table. "I think it's time we met properly. I'm the controlling shareholder of Meridian Digital Solutions." The silence that followed was exactly what I'd expected. Marcus and Trevor exchanged glances, clearly trying to process information that didn't fit their understanding of their own company. "I'm sorry," Trevor said carefully, "but our investors are Lone Star Holdings, Austin Growth Partners, and Pinnacle Investment Group. We don't have any individual shareholders with controlling interest." I slid 3 folders across the table. Lone Star Holdings, Austin Growth Partners, and Pinnacle Investment Group are all subsidiaries of Castellanos Capital Management, which I own entirely, which means I own 67% of your company. Watching them open the folders and realize the truth was almost amusing. Their lawyer had done decent work on the individual investment agreements, but he'd failed to identify the common ownership structure connecting all three entities. "This is," Marcus started, then stopped, clearly struggling to find words. "Legal," I finished. "Completely legal. Your attorney should have caught this 18 months ago, but apparently he didn't do sufficient due diligence on the investor entities." Trevor was flipping through pages, his face growing paler with each document. "What do you want?" "I want operational control, which I'm legally entitled to. You can both stay on as senior executives with competitive compensation packages, but I'll be making strategic decisions going forward." "Including personnel decisions?" Marcus asked quietly. "Especially personnel decisions. Speaking of which, I understand you recently promoted someone named Kieran Walsh to VP of Business Development." Both men nodded, looking increasingly uncomfortable. "I'll be reviewing that promotion, along with several other recent hiring and advancement decisions. I want a full personnel file review by end of week." Within 48 hours of taking control at Meridian, I learned more about Kieran Walsh than Lydia probably knew after months of dating him. The personnel review I'd requested revealed some interesting patterns. Kieran had been hired 6 months ago, despite having been fired from his previous 2 positions for what HR euphemistically called inappropriate workplace relationships. At his last company, he'd been terminated after a complaint involving manipulating co-workers for personal gain. At the company before that, similar issues with professional boundaries and ethical violations. Marcus and Trevor had apparently missed these red flags during their hiring process, focusing instead on Kieran's sales numbers and his polished interview performance. It was exactly the kind of surface-level evaluation that impressed people like Lydia, but missed deeper character issues. More interesting was how Kieran had positioned himself within Meridian's culture. He'd quickly identified the most influential employees and began cultivating relationships, particularly with people who had access to company information or decision-making processes. His promotion to VP had come after he'd successfully landed 2 major clients, but a closer look at those deals revealed he'd used information obtained from other employees' work. "He's smart," Trevor admitted during our Wednesday check-in meeting. "Maybe too smart. He has a way of making people feel like they're part of something bigger when they help him." "And the promotion?" I asked. Marcus shifted uncomfortably. He'd been pushing for it for weeks. Said he had opportunities at other companies but preferred to stay if we could recognize his value properly. Classic manipulation. Kieran had created artificial urgency around his advancement by implying he might leave, pressuring Marcus and Trevor to promote him before they'd properly evaluated his performance or character. "What kind of changes was he planning to make in his new role?" I asked. "He had some ambitious ideas about restructuring our client management approach," Trevor said. "Wanted to consolidate several accounts under his direct oversight. Said it would improve efficiency." I almost smiled. Kieran was systematically positioning himself to control Meridian's most valuable relationships, probably planning to leverage those connections for his next career move. It was exactly the kind of short-term thinking that looked like ambition, but was actually just opportunism. Thursday afternoon, I was reviewing Kieran's expense reports when my phone buzzed with a text from Lydia. She'd sent a photo of Kieran giving some kind of presentation to what looked like Meridian's full staff. "Kieran's introducing his new strategic initiatives to the team. This is what leadership looks like. He's already transforming the company culture." I studied the photo more carefully. Kieran was standing in front of a whiteboard covered with buzzwords and organizational charts, gesturing confidently while Marcus and Trevor sat in the background looking somewhat uncomfortable. The irony was perfect. Lydia thought she was watching Kieran demonstrate executive leadership, but she was actually watching him unknowingly present his plans to the man who now controlled his future. I decided it was time for phase 2 of my plan. Friday evening, I received the call I'd been expecting. Kieran Walsh's name appeared on my phone screen at 6:47 p.m. Patricia had arranged for him to be informed that afternoon about the ownership change and his upcoming performance review. "Mr. Castellanos?" His voice was tight with barely controlled panic. "I think there's been some misunderstanding about my position at Meridian." "No misunderstanding, Kieran. Please call me Dorian. I understand you've been seeing my ex-girlfriend, Lydia." The silence on the other end was delicious. I could practically hear his brain trying to process the connection between his new boss and his new relationship. That's a personal matter, he finally managed. Of course it is. Just like your employment is a business matter. I'm calling to inform you that your promotion to vice president is being rescinded, effective Monday. You'll be returning to your previous role pending a comprehensive performance evaluation. You can't do this because of your personal situation with Lydia. You're absolutely right, I can't. But I can do it because you've been manipulating company information, pressuring leadership for unearned advancement, and creating a pattern of workplace behavior that doesn't align with Meridian's values. Your relationship with Lydia is just coincidental. Another long pause. What do you want? I want you to understand something about ambition, Kieran. Real ambition isn't about impressing people with titles or positioning yourself for quick wins. It's about building something substantial that lasts. Something that can't be taken away by someone who actually understands how power works. Is this some kind of revenge scheme? Revenge? This is a business decision, though I will admit there's a certain poetic justice in the situation. Lydia left me because she thought I lacked ambition. She saw your promotion and your confident presentations and assumed you were more successful than I was. She measured success by the wrong metrics. I could hear Kieran breathing heavily on the other end of the line. Here's what's going to happen, I continued. You're going to return to your previous role and salary. You're going to complete a 90-day performance improvement plan. And you're going to demonstrate that you can succeed based on actual merit rather than manipulation and office politics. And if I refuse, then you'll be terminated for cause, which will make it very difficult to find your next position in Austin's tech community. Your choice. The line went quiet, except for the sound of Kieran's increasingly agitated breathing. Does Lydia know? He asked finally. Not yet, but I imagine she'll be very interested to learn that her new ambitious boyfriend is about to become significantly less impressive on paper. I'm curious to see how deep her commitment to your success really goes. You're destroying my career over a breakup. Kieran, I'm not destroying anything. I'm simply removing unearned advantages and asking you to succeed on merit. If your relationship with Lydia was based on substance rather than perceived status, this shouldn't change anything between you. After I hung up, I sat quietly for a while thinking about Lydia's reaction when she learned the truth. The weekend brought the most entertaining messages I'd received in months. Kieran must have told Lydia about the ownership change and his demotion, because Saturday morning I woke up to 17 text messages from her, starting angry and progressing through confusion to something approaching panic. Dorian, what the hell are you doing to Kieran? This is obviously about us. You can't ruin someone's career because you're bitter. Call me. We need to talk about this like adults. The final message, sent at 2:47 a.m., was the most revealing. I had no idea you had this kind of influence. Why didn't you ever tell me? I waited until Monday morning to respond. I'm happy to explain everything. Coffee at Mozart's at 10 a.m. Lydia arrived 15 minutes early, looking like she hadn't slept much over the weekend. She'd dressed carefully, not trying to impress me, but clearly wanting to project confidence she probably didn't feel. Dorian, I don't understand what's happening, she said before I'd even sat down. Kieran says you own Meridian Digital. How is that possible? I pulled out my laptop and opened a presentation I'd prepared. Do you remember how you always said I wasn't ambitious enough? That I was content being small and mediocre? She nodded warily. Here's what you didn't understand about my ambition. I turned the screen toward her. Castellanos Capital Management. Total assets under management, $47 million. Portfolio companies, 12. Employees across all holdings, 340 people. Lydia stared at the screen, scrolling through financial statements and corporate structures that clearly showed the scope of what I'd built, while she thought I was managing retirement accounts. I don't understand. You never told me about any of this. I tried to, multiple times. But you weren't interested in what I was actually building. You were interested in what looked impressive to other people. She continued scrolling, her expression shifting from confusion to something that might have been embarrassment. Meridian was just one acquisition in a larger strategy, I continued. I've been building this for 5 years, creating real wealth and real influence while you were comparing me to guys with flashy job titles. But why didn't you just show me this before? Because I wanted to know if you valued the person or just the appearance of success. When you left me for Kieran, you answered that question. Lydia set her coffee cup down with shaking hands. So what happens now? To Kieran, I mean. That depends on him. If he can actually perform at his job without manipulating people and cutting corners, he'll be fine. If not, he'll need to find work elsewhere. And us? I closed my laptop and looked at her directly. There is no us, Lydia. You made that clear when you chose someone you thought was more successful. The fact that you were wrong about who had more success doesn't change your choice. She was quiet for a long moment, processing not just the end of our relationship, but the realization that she'd fundamentally misunderstood who I was. I'm sorry, she said finally. I was wrong about everything. You weren't wrong about everything. You were right that you wanted someone more ambitious. You just didn't recognize ambition when you were living with it. 3 months later, the consequences of my decisions had rippled through everyone involved in exactly the ways I'd expected. Kieran failed his 90-day performance improvement plan spectacularly. Without the ability to manipulate information or pressure leadership, his actual work performance was mediocre at best. He missed deadlines, lost 2 client accounts, and generated multiple HR complaints from colleagues who were tired of his attempts to shift blame for his failures. Marcus and Trevor terminated him on a Friday afternoon in January. I wasn't involved in the decision. I deliberately stayed out of the day-to-day performance management to ensure his firing was based purely on merit. He kept insisting the performance standards were unfair, Trevor told me during our weekly check-in. Said he was being set up to fail because of personal grudges. But honestly, we just gave him the same expectations we have for everyone else. Kieran's termination created exactly the kind of professional reputation damage I'd predicted. Austin's tech community was small enough that word spread quickly about his departure from Meridian. Combined with his previous terminations, the pattern made him essentially unhireable at any reputable company in the city. Lydia's response to Kieran's professional collapse was equally predictable. She stood by him for about 6 weeks, posting supportive messages on social media about temporary setbacks and new opportunities. But as it became clear that Kieran's career trajectory had permanently shifted downward, her enthusiasm waned. By February, she'd moved out of the apartment they'd been sharing. By March, she was posting photos with a new boyfriend, a surgeon at Del Seaton Medical Center. Apparently, her commitment to Kieran's vision had been more conditional than she'd claimed. The irony was that I'd actually improved Meridian Digital's performance. Without Kieran's disruptive influence, and with proper oversight of the business operations, the company's client retention improved dramatically. Revenue was up 34% over the previous quarter, and employee satisfaction scores had reached an all-time high. You know, Marcus said during our March board meeting, this whole situation worked out better than we could have planned. Kieran was creating problems we didn't even realize we had. I'd also made some strategic changes that benefited everyone. I'd restructured the company's compensation plan to reward actual performance rather than political maneuvering, implemented profit sharing for all employees, and created clear advancement criteria based on merit rather than favoritism. The people who'd been doing good work all along, people like Sarah Chen in account management and David Rodriguez in creative, suddenly found themselves with better compensation and real advancement opportunities. The people who'd been relying on office politics and manipulation found themselves having to actually perform. It was exactly the kind of transformation that created lasting value rather than quick wins. One afternoon in late March, I received a LinkedIn message from someone I didn't recognize, Tyler Patterson, a business development specialist at a competing agency. Mr. Castellanos, I heard you might be interested in expanding Meridian's client base. I have some experience in that area and would love to discuss opportunities. I looked at his profile and almost laughed. Tyler Patterson was Kieran Walsh's new professional identity. He'd apparently decided that rebranding himself was easier than explaining his employment gap. I didn't respond to the message. Some lessons had to be learned the hard way. 6 months after taking control of Meridian Digital, I was reviewing quarterly reports when my assistant knocked on my door. "Mr. Castellanos, there's someone here to see you." Says her name is Lydia Morrison. I looked up, surprised. Lydia had kept her maiden name when we were together, but I hadn't seen or heard from her since our coffee meeting in October. She looked different, more professional, somehow more serious than the woman who'd sent me those dismissive breakup texts. She was wearing a business suit I didn't recognize and carrying herself with a confidence that seemed genuine rather than performed. "Hello, Dorian. I hope you don't mind me stopping by." "Not at all. Please, sit down. How are you?" "I'm learning a lot about myself, actually. I wanted to apologize to you properly, and to thank you for something I didn't understand at the time." I gestured for her to continue. "When you bought Meridian and demoted Kieran, I thought you were being vindictive, petty. I thought you were using your power to get back at me for leaving. And now? Now I understand that you were protecting a business you'd built and removing someone who was damaging it. Kieran wasn't who I thought he was. After his termination, I learned about his pattern of behavior at previous companies, the way he'd manipulated people, including me." Lydia paused, looking out the window at downtown Austin. "I spent 3 years with you, watching you build something real, and I never appreciated it because it wasn't flashy enough. Then I spent 3 months with someone who was all flash and no substance, and I thought that was an upgrade." "What are you doing now?" I asked. "I'm working at a nonprofit that helps small businesses access capital. Turns out I learned more about real business development during our relationship than I realized. I'm also going back to school part-time for my MBA. That sounds like a good fit for you. Dorian, I need you to know that what happened between us, it wasn't about you not being enough. It was about me not understanding what enough actually meant. I mistook ambition for image, success for status. I chose appearance over substance." We sat quietly for a moment. I could see that Lydia had genuinely reflected on what had happened and grown from it, which was more than I could say for Kieran. "I'm glad you figured that out," I said finally, "and I'm glad you found work that suits you better. Are you seeing anyone now?" I smiled. "I am, actually. Patricia Chen, my attorney. Turns out dating someone who understands your business is a significant advantage." Lydia laughed, and for the first time since she'd walked in, she looked genuinely happy. "That makes perfect sense. She probably appreciates what you've built. She helped me build it. That makes a difference." As Lydia was leaving, she turned back at the door. "Dorian, what you did with Meridian, was that always the plan? Even when we were together?" "Acquiring companies like Meridian was always the plan. The specific timing around your breakup was just coincidental convenience." She nodded, understanding the distinction. "I hope you know that if I'd understood who you really were, things might have been different between us. Maybe, but then we both would have missed the chance to learn who we actually are. Some growth only comes from consequences." 2 years later, I was sitting in my expanded office at Castellanos Capital Management when Patricia knocked on my door. She was now both my business partner and my fiancé, having helped me grow the company to $89 million in assets under management. "The quarterly reports are in," she said, settling into the chair across from my desk. "Meridian's performing exceptionally well. Revenue up 67% since you took control, employee retention at 94%, and Marcus just landed that Microsoft contract they've been pursuing." I smiled, thinking about how different Meridian looked now compared to the company Kieran had tried to manipulate 2 years ago. Under proper leadership, and with a merit-based culture, it had become exactly the kind of business Lydia had thought she was admiring. "Any word from our old friends?" Patricia asked with amusement. "Funny you should ask." I pulled up my laptop and showed her a LinkedIn post that had caught my attention that morning. It was from Lydia, announcing her graduation from UT's MBA program and her new position as Director of Strategic Partnerships at Austin Community Capital. The post included a photo of her at graduation, surrounded by family and colleagues. She looked genuinely successful in a way that had nothing to do with other people's achievements or status symbols. "Good for her," Patricia said. "She figured it out. Eventually. What about Kieran?" Still working under the Tyler Patterson identity last I checked. He's at some small agency in Dallas now. Apparently Austin's tech community has a long memory. I closed the laptop and looked out at the Austin skyline. The city had grown significantly since I'd returned from New York, but it was still small enough that reputations mattered, and patterns of behavior followed people. You know what I learned from all of this? I said to Patricia. What's that? Real ambition isn't about impressing other people or climbing ladders quickly. It's about building something sustainable that creates value over time. It's about choosing substance over appearance, even when appearance gets more immediate recognition. Patricia nodded. Lydia learned that lesson the hard way, but she learned it. And Kieran? Some people never learn. They keep looking for shortcuts and quick wins, never understanding that real success requires actually being good at something. I thought about the text message that had started everything. Lydia's photo with Kieran and her dismissive comment about my lack of ambition. At the time, it had stung because I'd thought she understood me better than that. Now I realized her misunderstanding had been a gift. It had forced me to clarify what I was building and why it mattered. It had shown me the difference between someone who appreciated substance and someone who was impressed by surface-level success. Most importantly, it had led me to Patricia, who understood that the most impressive achievements were often the ones that didn't need to be displayed for public admiration. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus at Meridian. Board meeting moved to Thursday. Also, we just got approved for that Series B funding round. Thanks for everything, Dorian. I showed the message to Patricia, who smiled. Congratulations, Mr. Castellanos. You're now the owner of a company worth approximately $23 million. Sometimes the greatest success comes from being underestimated by people who confuse